Hi, I'm Daniela Murtha, and this is our Martle Pond water quality analysis. So, what are the causes and consequences of water pollution, and how can the investigation of local water sources used to compare standards and influence personal choices and environmental policy? So, the major water pollutants are fertilizers, man made chemicals, the disposal of feces, and other water pollutants include microbes, which are bacteria um, that demand oxygen and they eat dead plant material, excess nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen, heavy metals from farms or factories, and disease causing agents. The most likely source of pollution in Coppell is probably runoff. So we're very obsessed here with keeping our houses looking very nice and having nice green grass. And so when rain occurs, it takes along with it the chemicals we use to keep our grasses looking so nice and moves them into nearby drains, which transfers it to different bodies of water like the Trinity River, which is our local watershed. Um, like fertilizers could contribute to a faster rate of eutrophication, which could damage the water. During eutrophication, the algae feeds off of the fertilizer, grows immensely, blocks sun from hitting other plants, and they end up dying because of lack of exposure. And the microbes that I mentioned before eat the plant material waste, so then they start to overpopulate and take up all of the oxygen in the water, which overall doesn't let any of the other organisms in the water able to breathe.
Hi, my name is Ivan Carrillo, and I'm going to be talking about the Martel Pond data. And first off, I want to start by what was measured and what we based our observations off of. So, measured dissolved oxygen, phosphates, and nitrates, turbidity, the biotic index, conductivity, temperature, and as well as pH. First off, just dissolved oxygen is just the amount of oxygen that's within the body of water or Martel Pond Lake, and phosphates and nitrates are just chemicals or stuff that's inside of the water that either can make or break the lake depending on how much there is. And the turbidity is just the overall clarity of the water and whether or not the sunlight is able to penetrate all the way to the bottom of the body of water. Biotic index is measure of a variety of microinvertebrates within the pond. And the conductivity, which is the water's ability to conduct electricity, and usually the lower the better because you don't want a whole bunch of metal pollutants in there. Temperature, just low temperatures usually are the best for dissolved oxygen. We figured out that these two are related in a really big way because the lower the temperature, the higher the amount of dissolved oxygen. Just because dissolved oxygen occurs more in colder water, so we look at the temperature and see whether or not it's too hot or too cold. And pH basically measures the acidity of the body of water and make sure it's not too toxic or it doesn't have a lot of pollutants for the animals that are within there. The data that we saw our dissolved oxygen slide, you can see that there's 7 different zones and we captured different amounts of dissolved oxygen in each one. We could say that there was more or less the amount of primary producers in each of these sections. One thing about the phosphates, we also recorded 7 zones of the phosphates, and most of them were pretty much the same, except for whenever you get to the final one, whenever it just bumps up to zone 7 and it goes up to 4.5 ppm, which is phosphates that are within the water, and that can be kind of dangerous because we don't want a whole lot of fertilizers within the pond because it can mess with a whole bunch of the animals that are in there.
Hello, my name is Rahul Gargapati, and today I'll be discussing the remaining measurements. To start off, I'll be talking about the nitrates. As you can see, most of the nitrate values for each zone are between 2 parts per million and 4 parts per million, with the exception of zone 4 that has about 6.5 parts per million. However, when averaged out, which is what we did to determine overall water quality, you'll get that the nitrates are about 4.12 parts per million, and therefore this indicates that there's a moderate amount of nitrogen in the water. As there's a moderate amount of nitrogen in the water, that shows that that isn't necessarily natural, and it's probably a result of some pollution from the community, especially in the form of fertilizers. This is because of how fertilizers actually add some nitrogen and phosphorus to the water. Next, I'll be talking about the pH of the water. Overall, most of the measurements from each zone are very close to 7, if not 7. As most organisms need a pH of 7 to survive, this shows that water quality is actually very good in terms of pH, as the water is very neutral and suitable for most organisms. Next, I'll be talking about turbidity. Most of the measurements from each zone are pretty low, except from zones 1 and 6, which have an oddly strange high turbidity of something over 10. However, when averaged out with the rest of the measurements, the overall turbidity turns out to be around 6.03 NTU, which is the units that turbidity is measured in. This is actually a pretty low turbidity and shows that the water is very clear and allows lots of light to enter. Because of how the standard for drinking water is actually 5 NTU, and as drinking water is very clean, this goes to show just how clean the overall water is and how clear it is. Therefore, this amount of turbidity indicates that water quality is really good, which is in terms of turbidity. The next measurement I'll be talking about is conductivity. Most of these are below 100 and aren't close to the range of 150 to 1500, which is what's ideal for most organisms. The conductivity has to be at least 150 because of how some salts and other important minerals are supposed to be in the water, and these amounts of conductivity show that those aren't present, and therefore the water quality is fair in terms of conductivity and isn't as good as it could be. Next, I'll be talking about the temperature of the water. Overall, the water temperatures are pretty good, as they're close to around 27 degrees Celsius, and this is fairly cool. And as the water is fairly cool, it allows a good amount of dissolved oxygen to ultimately dissolve into the water, and there's a high solubility for oxygen. Therefore, this goes to show that water quality is pretty good in terms of temperature as well, because of how it allows a good amount of dissolved oxygen, which is required for most organisms. The next measurement I'll be talking about is the biotic index. Overall, a great range of macroinvertebrates were found all throughout the pond and in each zone, and many of the discovered organisms.
Hello, Housing Society. My name is Mohsen Ali, and I'm going to be talking about what's happening in the pond. So, at this point, I hope you know what eutrophication is. But if you don't, here's a quick definition. Eutrophication is when excess nutrients get into a body of water, causing a large amount of algae to grow on top of the water, which blocks out sunlight, causing the plants underneath the water in the deep floor to die due to lack of oxygen. So as you can see, based off the data, eutrophication is definitely happening. Algae is growing due to the fertilizer, it's blocking out the sun and causing other plants to die. Then microbes form, feed off of the plant waste, and uses up all the dissolved oxygen in the water, which makes other organisms suffocate and they will die due to the lack of oxygen, which reduces the overall water quality. Why should the HOA be concerned? The HOA should be concerned about the water quality of this pond because right now it is currently a blight on a landscape. And over time, the beauty of the pond will fade. Furthermore, organisms are suffering due to eutrophication, leading to their death, which also emits a foul odor, also reducing the water quality. Another reason for this is due to the fact that humans intentionally release pesticides and fertilizers into the pond, causing more eutrophication. Humans should be trying to fix their mistakes, not create even more. Lastly, by ruining the water quality of this pond today, we directly influence and ruin the water quality of the Trinity River. This is a major source for drinking water and a large watershed for a large part of northern Texas. This just goes to show that a teeny tiny little action can create huge problems for our future. So we should preserve water quality and try to make it go up instead of down so that we can preserve the human population's health and safety because we rely on these ponds. Some solutions to better the water quality of this pond are: number 1, constantly filter and clean the pond, and also run monthly water quality tests to ensure that the pond's water quality remains in a good area. Number 2, please try to reduce the overall usage of fertilizers because due to runoff, those fertilizers go into the pond, causing eutrophication, which eventually leads to the death of the pond. Number 3, encourage citizens to take part of their community and increase nationalism by having community pond cleanup days, which shows the community that water quality is a need, not a want, and that they need to see the importance of the pond so that they can live in a good and a safe environment. In conclusion, the Martel Pond is currently in a state where its water quality is continuously decreasing. The HOA needs to act on it right now, because if they don't, the pond will eventually die. This only won't be a great loss of life, but over time it'll create many huge expenses for the HOA.